And hello, Savannah. Good afternoon. Thank you for tuning into Real Estate Real Talk with Julia M. Spencer on this Wednesday, May 16th, 2018. You're listening to WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. Before I start my show here today, I just want to let you know that the viewpoints expressed in the following program are not necessarily those of WRUU, its license holder, or its staff. And it is now 12:07 p.m. You have just reached the hump of hump day here on a Wednesday. I always want to make sure I remind you that the positive side of things of this week is coming up from now on. And today I want to talk a little bit about home buying. And specifically home buying for the individual. It's a little bit off from my usual topics of real estate investing, but it's more for the everyday homeowner. And I want to focus today on deciding whether you should even buy a home. I will also turn on my live Facebook cam on my Julia M. Spencer site. If you have any questions, you can actually just comment on that video. You can find me, just go to Facebook, Julia M. Spencer, and I will try to address your questions during the show as well. I'll do that here while I play my first song here from, let's start you off with some Pixies, some good tunes. And those were the Pixies with La La Love You, starting you off right here with a little bang on Wednesday afternoon. Thanks for tuning into Real Estate Real Talk with Julia M. Spencer. And in today's show, we're going to be talking about whether or not you should be buying a home and how you should even analyze that question. And I just turned on my live Facebook feed. I have somebody that's actually watching. You can also do that. You can go to Facebook and just type in my name, Julia M. Spencer, Spencer with a C. And let's talk about the topic. So I picked up this book probably like a year ago or so. I'm not really big into book reading. I'm mostly an audiobook person. But it's called Home Buying for Dummies, 3rd edition. I actually brought it here with me at the studio, showing it to you all who's watching here on Facebook. And it also says it's a reference for the rest of us. So that's a really good topic here because it's always good for me as a real estate investor that has been around for a long time to see what they're actually referencing and what kinds of advice they give to people. And of course, it's always my goal and to ensure that you're happy with your home purchases and also get the best deal and accomplish your financial goals, of course, if you are a real estate investor. And so I thought, cool book. I need to see what they write in there, see if it correlates with real life. A lot of times, real life is a little bit different than what's written in books, sometimes a lot different. So this book, the price was right. It was 99 cents at the local Goodwill. So I thought I'll buy it. I'll check it out. I put it on my shelf, and it's been there ever since. It's been a long time. Then one of my guests came. And, hi, Jeff Green, listening and watching from Nashville, Tennessee. I had an Airbnb guest, and she found the book and started looking through it and started reading it very, very intensely. And she thought she was actually in the process of buying a home or thinking about it, and this book was just right up her alley. And she said, well, hey, if you do ebooks, you should make a book about teaching people how to purchase their first home, not just for investors, but just everyday people. And had that in the back of my mind forever. And this was way before I started doing radio. And now I'm right here today, and I'm going to talk about some of these topics. Instead of making into a book, I'm going to make that information available to everybody that's listening here. In the Savannah area or anywhere else in the world, you can stream online, of course, WRUU.org. Just click on the play button there at the bottom. But so here's some of the things for you listeners that how this book is actually organized. I'm going to give you a little bit of a book review, and it talks about home economics, financing 101, property, players and prices, making the deal, the part of tenants, I'm not even sure what that is, and then various other stuff in this book like contracts, inspection reports and such. So what I'm going to do for the next few shows, if I don't have any live guests, of course, they always take precedence, We're going to talk about some of these topics, and I'm going to give you my opinion and my personal reality check since I've owned homes for many, many years now. So let's start with home economics for this show. And that would be Chapter 1, deciding whether you should buy or not. And I'll get to that in just a moment. I'm going to play you a real quick song to find my starting point here, and I'll be right back. And thanks for having stayed on here with me for Real Estate Real Talk. Today we're going to talk about whether or not you should buy a home. And it is actually part of a book that I picked up called Home Buying for Dummies. And kind of started reading it. I don't read very often, so bear with me here. But some of the points that this book makes are actually pretty good points. So I wanted to make sure that I address them. In the very first chapter, very beginning chapter here, it actually talks about weighing the advantages of owning versus renting. And this is a big topic for a lot of people. And that's really the first thing that you have to think about when you are trying to buy a home. So first off, home ownership, of course, isn't for everyone. And you have to be very careful about weighing the advantages and disadvantages of owning versus renting. And in this book, it discusses that you actually need to be very careful if you become a home buyer, that you don't stretch your budget and your other resources in terms of attention and maintenance, which is a lot of time that you have to invest into buying a home. But let's talk about some of the advantages of home buying. And then we'll address your question here. Owning could be less expensive than renting. Keyword, could be. So it actually says in the book here, to figure out the price of a home that you can afford, approximately, is the same cost as your current monthly rent multiplied by 200. So the calculation that this book gives you is if you're renting for about $1,000 a month, multiply that by 200, you should be able to buy a $200,000 home, and it would be about the same. That would be how much you could afford. I'm not really sure I like that calculation. That's a very, very generalized calculation. And it also it does factor in the tax savings that you get from your tax returns. But, for example, the rent that I am paying right now where I live is about $1,500, which means I should be able to live in a home of $300,000, but I would never buy a $300,000 home. It would just be, in my area where I live, it would be too expensive. It's way more home than I need. And so it's a very general calculation. But in this book, that is the calculation that's given for you to be able to find out how much home you can afford. You should be able to multiply 200 times the monthly rent that you pay. Now, as a renter, your rent is actually fully exposed to the increases in the cost of living, which is kind of like a disadvantage of renting. And that is also known as inflation. That just means that there's a reasonable expectation for annual increases in your rent. It's about 4% per year. So depending on how long you plan on renting, you kind of need to multiply that times those 4%. And of course, it accumulates and exponentially. And then, of course, maybe renting is for you for right now, but if you go out many, many years, and especially if you're young and you have many, many more living years, that could be quite costly, and it might be more advantageous to own. So this is the case that this book makes for ownership advantages. Of course, it's better if you planning on staying in the same place for a long time, to go ahead and purchase a home. They have some really cool calculation, charts here where you can have a multiplication factor to determine. Ooh, somebody's calling us. All right, hold on just a second. We are having some people calling here to the studio. So anyways, distracted me here for a minute. Anyways, the book has some really cool multiplication factor tables to determine your rent in the future for the future years at about 4% annual inflation rate. It also has a really cool multiplication factor for 6%. So if you're planning to live for another 60 years or so, for example, your current monthly rent at an inflation multiplication factor of 4% has to be 10.52. So in 60 years, your projected future rent could be quite astronomical. So I would definitely consider your age as one of the factors of whether or not you should purchase a home. Not sure who called the studio just now, but once I play a song, if that person can call back, I will definitely pick up the phone. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the ownership advantages of home ownership. Let's talk about the age thing that I'd kind of just already addressed. U.S. health statistics indicate that at age 50, you have a life expectancy of nearly 30 more years. And at the age of 65, nearly 20 more years. And although the cost of purchasing a home generally increases over the years, after you purchase a particular home, the bulk of your housing costs aren't exposed to inflation. That is one of the 5 dimensions, these 5 advantages of home ownership that I discuss in a lot of my ebooks, as well as in my YouTube videos, that especially if you have a fixed rate mortgage, that your investment, your home investment, whether it's a home ownership or if it is a real estate that you purchased for investment purposes, like you're renting it out, is actually quite safe from inflation because your costs don't really go up with a fixed rate mortgage. Now, your payment might still change over the years because, of course, insurance costs will change. Sometimes HOA fees change. Also, your taxes will most certainly change depending on the value changes of your property and how your taxes are calculated. But the mortgage part, which is the bulk of your mortgage or of your payment for a mortgage, doesn't change usually if you have a fixed rate mortgage. Well, not usually; it never does. So the smaller property taxes, insurance, maintenance expenses will increase over time, of course, but that's just a small portion. So that's another advantage of home ownership. And of course, you're always going to need a place to live. And over the long term, inflation has almost always been around. So you kind of can guess on that. So there's kind of a good reason for owning a home versus renting it, looking at those variables, of course. And that's one of the big things. Now, let's address a question on my Facebook feed here real quick before I go to a little break, and then we're going to talk some more about advantages and disadvantages of home ownership. I received a question from Ramsey DePaula. He's in Georgia, and he is asking me, what would you recommend for someone who is thinking about starting on tax lien or tax deed investing, I presume? The best thing that I would recommend to start on anything is to get educated. And the best way is to get educated is, of course, listen to my radio show right here. Read as much as you can. Get as many books out there that you can. But after you've done all of that and you've listened to ebooks and you've done all the research that you can possibly do on your own, the best thing is to go out and do it. I mean, there's really no better education that I can offer you other than you actually doing it. And in Georgia, of course, tax sale foreclosure investing happens on the auctions themselves happen on the first Tuesday of the month, and the auction hours are 10 to 4 p.m. usually. So check out when and where they are, where you want to go, to which county where you live, and attend an auction and observe it firsthand. And I tell all my starting investors to go ahead and attend at least 6 auctions in the first 6 months. That way you can get kind of the feel of who shows up when, what kinds of prices properties are sold for, and the best and most important, network with people. Networking with people is the most important thing that you can do. I've learned most of what I know, I've learned from other people, not from books. Of course, I love reading books. Well, listening to ebooks anyways. I'm not a big reader, but most of what I've learned is from other people, and that's how you're going to learn the best. And with that, let's go to a quick break here, and I will be right back, and we're going to talk more about whether or not you should purchase a home. And thanks for staying with me here with Real Estate Real Talk. Julia M. Spencer just had another guest here that used to be a guest comment on my Facebook Live feed here. The answer whether or not you should buy a home is a emphatic capital letter yes. We'll get to that. There's a couple of times when it might not be as advantageous to purchase a home, but I have a way around that as well. So let's talk a little bit more about advantages of home ownership. One of the things is actually that you can do to it whatever it is that you want. And a lot of people do that. They'll paint they'll paint orange walls, have green shaggy rags and those kinds of things. And you can do that if that's your own home. You don't have to verify with a landlord. You don't have to ask permission. You can do all of the changes to a house that you want to do. But I do want to caution homeowners, though. It's great to be able to alter your home, but don't make it too weird. If you make it outrageous looking, and then only a small percentage of people will be able to like it in case you had to sell it at some later point in time. And also beware of running yourself into financial ruin. Those are kind of like some of the things that are addressed in this book. And that last one is probably more of a point that I wanted to mention. Changing, improving, remodeling, whatever you want to call it, costs a lot of money. I mean, that really is it. And you don't want to outprice yourself way above what you would have normally paid in rent by purchasing a home that's maybe a little bit cheaper in terms of a monthly payment, and then sticking way too much money into it and beginning to change it and to add stuff. And you want to have some money in savings and retirement and all of that as well. So you have to have a really good financial head on your shoulders, understand all your financial obligations, and don't make your house too weird, and don't run yourselves into financial ruin, some of the things. Another thing that this book discusses is an advantage of home ownership is that you can avoid unpleasant landlords. Boy, that's a good topic right there. Let's see. Here's the thing, and I made a note about this because, like I said, I wanted to give you a little bit of my 2 cents worth of this book. You won't have to answer to the whims of an evil landlord if you own your own property, but you still have to deal with neighbors, unless you live out in the country somewhere and there's nobody around you. You still have to deal with mortgage companies. You still have to deal with insurance companies. You have to deal with tax assessors. You have to deal with HOAs. You have to deal with condo associations. All of those, instead of just dealing with one landlord, you have now several accounts and several people and several problems. And for example, let me just give you a brief example here in Savannah. I just got a letter in the mail stating that Savannah is now going to collect a fire fee or something for the downtown district to basically offset the costs of fire protection. Yet another thing that I have to do to deal with, and yet another account. These are all things you wouldn't have to worry about if you are not a homeowner, if you're renting. That would be your landlord's responsibility. But again, just because you're avoiding unpleasant landlords doesn't mean you're completely shielded from all management and responsibilities of home ownership might sometimes be higher than dealing with just a landlord. All right, let's see what else we have in this wonderful book, this home buying book for dummies that I brought here with me today. Let's talk about renting advantages. Chuck Fegan here. Thanks for listening. I know you might not like this, but there are actually some advantages for renting. The first thing is, and I'm going to talk about the end of what I think which one you should do. Simplicity. Yeah, it's a heck of a lot easier in finding a place to buy, first off. When you buy, you must line up financing, conduct inspections, and deal with myriad other issues that renters never have to face. And actually, you know what? We are at the bottom of the hour. Let me talk about the more renting advantages here in a minute. I'm going to play you some announcements because I forgot. And I will be right back here, interrupting here my regular broadcast for the PSA.
Fathers Mentoring Sons will present the organization's annual Black Tie Affair, featuring food, recognitions, and scholarship awards on Saturday, June 16th at the Liberty City Community Center on Millsby Lane Boulevard in Savannah. The event will benefit fathers mentoring sons, promoting communication, teamwork, leadership, conflict resolution, and other life skills in young men to reduce crime in Savannah. For more information, visit fathersmentoringsons.org.
And thanks for staying back on with me. We're talking about renting advantages versus owning advantages of homes. The next one is convenience. When you own a home, you are basically signing up for the never-ending task of property maintenance and upkeep. And kid you not, this will be always following you. There's not a day goes by that I don't have to take care of something somewhere. It never ends. You think you're done, you're never done. You have the list of the urgencies that are emergencies. Then you have the list of the things that are maybe good to-dos. And then you have the wish list. So you really never are done maintaining your property if you're taking care of your property the way that you want to. And of course, unfortunately, if you are a homeowner, you have to deal with that. But if you're renting, just put up your feet on the chaise and get a glass of wine and just relax. Just call somebody to take care of it. And hopefully they're a good landlord and they'll take care of it. Another advantage about renting is flexibility. As a homeowner, if you want to move, you must deal with the significant chores of selling your home or finding a tenant to rent it. And even finding a property management company to rent it for you is a chore. So, and I've went through this many, many times. It is definitely not as flexible. You can alleviate that a little bit by purchasing homes in areas that are desirable. Then it might be a little bit easier to rent your home out kind of sort of quickly. Then, of course, the other advantage is increased liquidity if you rent. When you purchase a home, you have to come up with a down payment with closing costs. You probably have to purchase the services of an inspector. You'll have to prepay insurance for the year sometimes. And you have to come up with a contract fee so that your property can go on contract. So as a renter, you can keep all that extra cash to yourself and your budget's much easier. And you don't have to worry about any upkeep expense surprises. And let me give you just a case in point. I actually rent a really nice condo here in Savannah. And of course, my air conditioning broke last week. And it wasn't that big of a deal because it hasn't been really hot until very recently. And I know as a homeowner as well, that's one of the most expensive things to break in a home, an air conditioning unit. It can run, actually a compressor, I think, runs anywhere between maybe $2,000 or so. And then to replace the whole unit, $4,500, maybe $5,000. Even with insurance, you have a cost associated with replacing the Freon and things like that. And of course, as a renter, I just made... I didn't even have to call. I could just go online and call it in, and somebody came, and it was fixed within 3 days. I mean, even me as a landlord, I can't do it that fast for my property. So this is an awesome thing. If you don't need the stresses, if you have maybe a stressful life already, if you are a business owner, or you have a very stressful job or a big family, or even not even just a big family, just a family that requires a lot of time and attention, homeownership may not be the right thing for you. Or maybe if you're elderly and you just want peace and quiet and just relax, then homeownership might not be for you. And of course, you have, as a renting advantage, also better diversification, because you can use your money to invest in other things. You can buy stocks, bonds. You can even invest in real estate, stocks, or mutual funds. So you can still do the real estate investing side a little bit on the side, without actually owning real estate on your own. And another advantage of renting, maybe it's a lower cost. If you live in an area where the home prices have rocketed ahead much faster than rental rates, then real estate may be overpriced and might not be a good buy. And just give you a case in point, when I lived in California, I actually lived for about a year outside Sacramento, California. actually about halfway between Sacramento and San Francisco in Davis, California. And the house prices were astronomical. I mean, they were just astronomical. But I was able to rent a home, a really nice 4-bedroom, 3-bath home, over 2,000 square feet for $1,700. Now, mind you, this is a lot of years ago, but there's no way I could have even gotten a mortgage payment for $1,700, not to the point that I could even get approved. The houses were selling for about $400,000 at the time. I would have been really hard-pressed to get an equal amount of house for that kind of money per month. So renting should be cheaper than buying if you expect to move soon, and buying and selling property costs big bucks. But with real estate, agent commissions, loan fees, title insurance, inspections, all those other costs, your property must appreciate approximately 15% just for you to break even and recoup these costs. This is what this book says. And they also say, therefore, buying property that you don't expect to hold on to for at least 3 and preferably 5 or more years doesn't make much economic sense for you. And I completely, wholeheartedly agree with that. Don't count on a high appreciation of your property. I purchased property back in, I want to say it was 2005 in Macon, Georgia. And the property has consistently declined in value to the point that I really just can't sell it without taking a huge loss. My amortization of the mortgage doesn't keep up with the decrease in value of that property in that area, so I'm just stuck with it. So that those things can happen. They do happen. I'm basically forced to rent it until something in the market changes, and those things do happen. So all of that being said, I don't want to discourage you from purchasing your own home as an investor or as a private homeowner. And specifically, the reason I'm telling you this is because you can have both. And here's my recommendation to you, I guess, my 2 cents worth here. Chuck Fagan is going to love me for this one. Why don't you do both? If you want to purchase a home, let's say here in Savannah, we have a really kind of a sort of booming market here, I believe, especially out there on the islands, vacation areas, and even other places here in Savannah. The market is pretty good. The interest rates are pretty low. And if you don't like the suburban lifestyle and you don't want the homeowner's maintenance and things, purchase a home anyways and make it into a rental. Become an investor. But if you prefer living in a place where somebody else takes care of everything, you can also rent. And that's kind of what I'm doing. I have lots of real estate. My primary residence is, I have several residences, but my primary residence where I stay currently is rented and has been for a couple years. And that way, when I come home, I can truly relax and somebody else takes care of everything. And my real estate career and business is separate from where I actually live. And so I still can take advantage of all the advantages of home ownership, the tax savings, the amortization of my loan, the sheltering from inflation, and all the other dimensions of the multi-dimensional asset class real estate. And I still can enjoy living in a place that has a really nice pool that somebody else takes care of, and a nice little workout room, and a management that takes care of everything, that when I actually come home, I am truly, truly home. And that was my 2 cents worth on renting versus owning. But before I finish, we have about 15 more minutes here on my show. I want to talk a little bit about some of the pitfalls of rent versus buy decisions. These are the things that people typically get stuck on, and the reasons why people typically make bad mistakes on the rent versus buy decision. I'm going to talk about that here in a few minutes. And want to address something here by one of my watchers here, Kale. Santiago, he says he agrees. He's not really a reader. He prefers audiobooks. And yes, thank you. Thank you for that approval here. Yes, you can. This is probably one of the first books I've read in a long time. But I do prefer ebooks because I can do other things as well. So hopefully this book is also available as an ebook version. I don't know. I didn't write it. I'm just telling you where I'm getting my information here today. So what we're going to do for the next 15 minutes, we're going to talk about some of these pitfalls. First off, I'm going to play you a little song here, and I will be right back after that.
WRUU 107.5 FM is all volunteer community radio. Tune in this afternoon. From 3 to 4, Rob Hessler and David Laughlin present Art on the Air, an interview program dedicated to the visual arts in Savannah. From 4 to 6, Louis Clausey and Matthew Adams present That Old Savannah Magic, a variety show featuring Savannah history, radio theater, interviews, and music. From 6 to 7, Barbara Humphreys and Albert Strickland present Voices of Resistance, giving voice to justice and peace activists with no other voice in the Savannah media. Find our full schedule at wruu.org.
WRUU brings you the most diverse and passionate local radio programming on the air in Savannah. This all-volunteer and non-profit community radio station accepts no money from any form of government. Our diversity and independence is made possible only through the generous financial support of listeners like you. We rely on your annual and ongoing monthly contributions to cover the many costs associated with bringing you our broadcast and web programming. If you are a contributor, thank you. If you're not yet a contributor, please show your appreciation of the role WRUU plays in your life by becoming a contributor in any amount. You can donate quickly and easily by credit card or check. Just find the donate and subscribe links at wruu.org. Thanks for listening to and supporting WRUU. And thanks to your listeners for having tuned into Real Estate Real Talk with Julia M. Spencer here today on a Wednesday afternoon, May 16th, 2018. Today we're talking about whether or not you should buy a home. And for this last segment, we have maybe about 8 minutes left or so. I want to talk about some of the pitfalls of making that decision whether you should buy or rent. It's one of the things that's mentioned in this book that I've been reading called Home Buying for Dummies. I wanted to analyze that a little bit for you to see whether the advice given here actually makes sense. And it's actually a pretty good book, actually. So let's talk about some of these pitfalls. One of the pitfalls that they discuss is that renting, people rent because they think it's cheaper. But the book actually says you must compare the monthly costs of home ownership with the monthly costs of renting. And you also have to think about the future. So just as when you go to, for example, send your kids to college, or you're going to college because you're kind of banking on the fact that you're going to be making more than just a minimum wage job later on because you have that education, that's kind of like the same thinking that you have to put in your head for home ownership. Your education, of course, affects your career prospects, but your housing, whether or not you buy it, will also basically decide on your housing costs for many, many years or even decades to come. And again, as a real estate investor, my advice here is a little bit biased. It's great to buy a home for the future and kind of like set in stone the price that you're going to pay for rent for the next 30 years or so, or even longer. But if you have more than one, that's yet even better. So I always advocate investing in real estate, even if that's maybe not your main line of work or will ever be. Another pitfall that they're talking about here in this book is fretting too much over job security. So many people are fretting about job security. I mean, I've had so many discussions with people saying, there's like, well, not sure if I'm going to keep my job. I might lose my job. I might get fired. And I'm like, okay, stop right there. If there's no reasonable expectation that you're actually, or likelihood that you're going to be losing your job, if you don't have any such information from your from your employer, then don't fret about it. Don't worry about it. Even if you do, thousands of people bounce back really easily after losing a job, especially if you have an education. So don't postpone your purchase of a home unless you really, really know that your employment situation is not stable at the moment. And a lot of times this information is available beforehand, so you don't have to really speculate about that too much. Now, of course, things happen. You might lose your job. Then in that case, you'll come up with a second solution or a third solution. I mean, don't fret that at the moment, if you don't have any such expectations, there's no reason why you shouldn't purchase a home if that's what you want to do. Another pitfall that people kind of get into when they make a decision of whether renting or buying is buying a home when you expect to move soon. So here, this is one of my biggies. I have actually made that mistake. You have to really kind of count with the fact that you need to stay put somewhere between 3 to 5 years. If you're not expected to stay put between 3 to 5 or longer, don't buy. You're just going to waste all your money in closing costs, in fees, inspections, and all the startup costs of purchasing a home. And you're not going to recoup that in that short amount of time. And you can't bank on the fact that your home is going to appreciate, especially if you don't purchase homes all the time. You can't gauge that appreciation factor. Succumbing to pushy salespeople, another pitfall of the rent versus buy decision. That's kind of self-explanatory. If you're easily persuaded by salespeople, then you might need to send somebody else to do the negotiations for you. And ignoring logistics, another big pitfall of purchasing, buying versus renting. I can't tell you how bad that is. I actually talked about this with one of my guests here on the show before, Mary, and you have to really calculate the commute. You can purchase the perfect home for the perfect price, for the perfect setup, everything perfect. But if you have to drive an hour or longer to get to work and back every day, you're going to be in commuter purgatory. And it's going to grow very old. You're going to hate your job. You're going to hate your car. You're going to hate your drive. And you're going to hate your home. So don't do it. I'm telling you this from personal experience. I've done this before. Overbuying and underbuying are both pitfalls as well. You either own your home or it owns you. This goes for overbuying, of course. Make sure your finances are in order. Make sure you understand the extra expenses associated with home ownership. And of course, don't overindulge your home in changing things. Another thing I wanted to say is that whenever you do purchase a home and you find yourself this perfect fixer-upper, it's going to be a fixer-upper forever unless you have some concrete plans to get it fixed up the way that you want it. And that's going to be your biggest problem, because if you didn't calculate all those costs in from the beginning, stuff is just going to be undone for years and years. And let me just give you a brief case in point. My parents purchased a fixer-upper home back in the early 80s. And ever since then, and they've had the home literally for, going on 40 years here soon. And it was never completed. It's just one thing after another, and it's just... It was very frustrating. It was a very frustrating life for them to try to do that. And I want to prevent you from going through that same kind of problems. Buying a home just because it's a grown-up thing to do. Yeah, it's not a grown-up thing to do if you don't do grown-up decisions. So here's something I wanted to mention really briefly. Gosh, I only have 2 minutes, but I'm going to talk about this because this is also very true. So a study supports the notion that the life of a typical renter is in some respects better than that of the average home buyer or home owner. Peter Rossi and Eleanor Weber of the University of Massachusetts Social and Demographic Research Institute conducted a survey of thousands of people. And here are some of their survey findings. Homeowners are less social on average than renters, spending less time with friends, neighbors, and coworkers. That's not because you're unsocial. It's because you're busy mowing the lawn and fixing your garage door or whatever. And trust me, that is truth. Homeowners spend more time on household chores, as I just stated. And perhaps for the preceding reasons, renters have more sex and less marital discord and cope better with parenting than homeowners do. Man, I wish I would have known that about 20 years ago. Anyways, buying, another last pet peeve here, buying because you're afraid that escalating prices will lock you out. Again, a bad reason. A lot of times, patient buyers who can wait out the market that has increased sharply in value are often rewarded with steadying and in some cases declining prices. So make sure you understand what you can afford, understand all the downfalls or pitfalls of home buying before you buy them. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this book. It's actually a pretty good book, so I'm going to do that in my future shows here. I hope you enjoyed what you're listening to so far. I'm going to be right back with my last message here, and I'll be right back. WRUU brings you the most diverse and passionate local radio programming on the air in Savannah. This all-volunteer and nonprofit community radio station accepts no money from any form of government. Our diversity and independence is made possible only through the generous financial support of listeners like you. We rely on your annual and ongoing monthly contributions to cover the many costs associated with bringing you our broadcast and web programming. If you are a contributor, thank you. If you're not yet a contributor, please show your appreciation of the role WRUU plays in your life by becoming a contributor in any amount. You can donate quickly and easily by credit card or check. Just find the donate and subscribe links at wruu.org. Thanks for listening to and supporting WRUU. And thanks for having tuned into Real Estate Real Talk with Julia M. Spencer here. Just wanted to tell you really briefly that the viewpoints expressed in the preceding program were not necessarily those of WRUU, its license holder, or its staff. Wanted to just tell you really quick how to reach me. My name is Julia M. Spencer. You can email me at realestate@juliamspencer.com. My show, Real Estate Real Talk, is on Wednesdays at noon. I will also be on May 21st from 4 to 5 p.m. And that day we also have a charity pint night at the Green Truck Pub here in Savannah, Georgia, benefiting WRUU. The next show on will be Jazz Brunch, hosted by Dave Lake. Send me your comments, questions, suggestions, or if you want me to make another show about a topic, feel free to suggest that topic to me. Thank you, Savannah listeners, for tuning in. I hope you have an awesome rest of your Wednesday and week. Happy investing. And I hope you can tune in again next week. You're listening to WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.
For your free guide to real estate investing, visit juliamspencer.com.